After a tense confrontation with my mother-in-law, who harshly criticized my employment status and educational background, the situation escalated when she unexpectedly threw hot water at me. This shocking and unwarranted act could have caused serious harm, but thankfully, I escaped injury. I was stunned by her extreme behavior, especially since my husband, Eric, was the one without a job, not me. Her unreasonable actions had been building up my resentment to a breaking point. I resolved to leave, declaring firmly, "If this is how you feel, I have no choice but to go." My mother-in-law surprisingly seemed almost pleased by my decision, showing no remorse. Unable to tolerate the toxic environment any longer, I decided to return to my parents' home. Unbeknownst to her, I had been the primary financial supporter of her household, having earned approximately $41,000 a month from stock trading after leaving my previous job. Despite being pushed out, I was confident in my ability to support myself independently. Eric and I had met in college, both studying economics with aspirations of careers in finance. After landing jobs at different brokerage firms, Eric proposed, and I eagerly accepted, looking forward to our future together. However, our plans changed unexpectedly when Eric asked me to quit my job and move in with him and his mother to keep her company after his father's passing. Despite my initial reluctance, I agreed, hoping it would not be too burdensome. Yet after the recent events, I deeply regretted my decision and resolved never to assist my mother-in-law again, even as she faced financial difficulties. Eric had become his mother's sole companion after his father's death when he was in middle school. As an only child, he was deeply concerned for her well-being, which I understood and respected. Consequently, I agreed to move into Eric's family home 3 weeks later. Initially, my mother-in-law seemed pleased to have her son back, but her attitude changed drastically. Her cold, unwelcoming gaze made it clear she did not approve of me. Despite feeling unwelcome, I tried to stay positive, brushing off a faint muttering from her that I couldn't quite make out. Perhaps it was about me, perhaps not. I chose to ignore it. Living with her quickly proved more challenging than anticipated. One morning, I was jolted awake by her loud voice demanding breakfast at 5 a.m. Her reasoning. "Don't just lay around because you're not working," she scolded sharply. Though the early hour felt absurd, I didn't argue and began preparing the meal. As I endured her constant critiques about my speed and efficiency, breakfast, which took what felt like an eternity but was only 25 minutes, was finally ready. I apologized for the delay, only to be met with more complaints about the time it took me. Her next grievance was that the soup was too salty, though I honestly didn't think it was. According to her, my cooking was a deliberate attack on her health. "Are you saying there's something wrong with my taste? Are you trying to kill me with these salty meals?" she accused. Stunned by her harsh words, I questioned her motives, a mix of curiosity and concern bubbling up inside me. Finally, I asked, "Why are you so harsh on me? What's going on? What are you talking about?" "I don't think I'm being harsh," she retorted. "Are you trying to make me look like the bad guy? That's not what I meant." Her response only left me feeling more overwhelmed by her constant pressure, unable to argue back. "Finish eating and start cleaning. After that, there's laundry to do. There's no time to rest," she commanded. From that point on, every day became a relentless barrage of criticisms and tasks that wore me down both mentally and physically. As I cleaned, she would point out mist dust in the corners. While doing laundry, she complained about stubborn stains. After about a month of this routine, I felt myself nearing a breaking point and decided to talk to Eric about it. "It's about your mother," I began hesitantly. "She's been very critical every day, and it's becoming difficult for me. Could you please ask her to ease up?" Eric's response was shockingly non-existent, which initially irritated me. But then I noticed he looked unusually pale, as if burdened by something significant. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I asked. After a pause, Eric hesitantly revealed, "Actually, I've been fired from the company." I was stunned, unable to process his words immediately. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It isn't," Eric explained. "Due to an economic downturn, the company had to downsize and I was laid off." "So you'll be unemployed from tomorrow?" I asked. "Well, I can work for 1 more month after receiving the notice of dismissal," he said. "But fortunately, I've been using my knowledge from my time at the securities company to trade stocks. Though it was challenging at first, I'm now earning about $41,000 a month. So we're not struggling financially." I comforted Eric and for a brief moment set aside the ongoing harassment from my mother-in-law. From the following day, I continued to endure her harsh treatment while Eric was out of work. Feeling the need to be strong and supportive, I pushed through the challenging situation. A month later, Eric's official unemployment status took a toll on us both. At first, he made an effort to look for a job, but soon he began spending most of his time at home, offering excuses instead of making progress. "Shouldn't you start looking for a job more seriously?" I suggested, hoping to motivate him to find a new path forward. "I'm looking, but it's tough to find a good company that suits me," Eric replied, his voice lacking any real urgency or intent to find new work soon. Reluctantly, I continued to be the primary provider. As time passed, my mother-in-law's harshness only intensified, leaving me increasingly drained. Initially, I told myself I had to endure it because Eric was unemployed, but eventually, that reasoning no longer seemed valid. My days began to blur into a haze of listlessness. One morning, Eric left the house early, possibly to start a serious job hunt for the first time. After he left, I started my usual chores. "Make sure it's clean. Do it properly," my mother-in-law nagged from her spot on the living room sofa, sipping her coffee and throwing sarcastic comments my way. Fed up, I chose to ignore her. Suddenly, she lost her temper and shouted, "How dare you ignore me? You're just a mere daughter-in-law with no job." I kept cleaning, trying to block out her harsh words, but her anger only escalated. She confronted me again, yelling, "Unemployed and uneducated people like you should leave this house." In her rage, she splashed the hot water she had prepared for her coffee onto me. "It's hot, please stop," I screamed, shocked by her sudden aggression. Thankfully, the water wasn't boiling, so I avoided serious burns, but the situation could have been disastrous. With a cold, unfeeling smirk, she venomously declared, "This is what I've been saying. If you're not working, leave this house." Exhausted by her relentless hostility, I struggled to maintain my composure. I felt I had no choice but to comply with her demand. "All right, I'll leave," I said. "Good, that makes things easier. Leave quickly," she snapped. I swiftly packed my belongings and decided to leave that very day, unwilling to endure another moment in such a toxic environment. I headed straight to my parents' home. When I arrived, my parents were surprised by my sudden visit but welcomed me warmly. I waited for a call from Eric, but it never came. No calls, no messages. Feeling isolated, I resolved not to reach out until he did. A month passed since I returned to my parents' house, and still, there was no word from Eric. My affection for him began to wane, and I started contemplating divorce. Then, one early morning, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I glanced at the monitor, I was stunned to see both Eric and my mother-in-law standing outside. "What now?" I muttered to myself, baffled by their sudden appearance after all this time. "Yes, what can I do for you?" I asked through the intercom. "I've forgiven you now. Come back home quickly," my mother-in-law shouted, her voice harsh as usual. "Forgiven me? What are you talking about?" I was perplexed. I hadn't done anything that required forgiveness from her. After expressing my confusion, I ended the intercom call, boiling with frustration at her presumptuous attitude. However, they didn't leave. Instead, they began banging on the front door violently. "Don't just hang up on me. Come on, let's go back," my mother-in-law yelled, her voice echoing with urgency and irritation. Concerned that their loud presence might disturb the neighborhood, I felt a surge of anxiety about their relentless insistence. Reluctantly, I opened the door and invited them inside. After settling them on the living room sofa, I asked about the reason for their sudden and unexpected visit. It was particularly baffling since it was my mother-in-law who had insisted I leave, and now she was asking me to return. The whole situation was bewildering. "You're the one who told me to leave. There's no way I can go back now," I asserted firmly, my frustration evident. My mother-in-law accused me of being childish and claimed she had forgiven me, insisting that I return and stay at her house. She even went so far as to say she'd allow an unemployed and uneducated person like me to stay there. "But I'm not the unemployed one, it's Eric," I retorted, hoping to clarify the situation. "If I go back, you'll just take advantage of me every day. I might not be working, but what about your son?" Eric seemed taken aback by this revelation, and my mother-in-law looked confused, indicating that Eric hadn't informed her about his job loss. Pressed further, Eric finally admitted to being laid off from the company. Apologies and explanations followed, with Eric trying to justify his silence by relying on my income for financial stability. My mother-in-law, shocked by the news, expressed her anger toward Eric for not finding a job yet. Why did you keep quiet about this? What are we going to do now? She scolded him. Eric assured her that my income would be sufficient for the time being, which only led my mother-in-law to label him as worthless for not actively seeking employment. Fed up with Eric's excuses and the entire ordeal, I couldn't believe they expected me to just return and act as if nothing had happened. When my mother-in-law suggested I come back, I flatly refused, given all the mistreatment I had endured. Their unexpected visit quickly spiraled into a heated argument, especially when the truth about my mother-in-law's shocking act of pouring boiling water on me came to light. Eric was horrified upon learning about the incident and confronted his mother. "Why did you do that?" he demanded. She confessed, attributing her actions to my perceived neglect. This revelation sparked a fierce exchange between Eric and his mother, forcing me to intervene. I suggested they take their dispute back to their own home, highlighting the discomfort their loud arguing caused in someone else's space. This seemed to shift their attitude. The once assertive and domineering pair now resorted to pleading, begging me to return and promising no further trouble. However, I saw right through their assurances. Eric's promise to find a job seemed insincere, and my mother-in-law's vow to refrain from causing trouble appeared equally unreliable. I voiced my doubts, making it clear that their promises felt empty and that they would likely take advantage of me again. Their silence in response only confirmed my suspicions. Leaving them in the living room, I retreated to my room to collect my thoughts. When I returned 10 minutes later, they were still seated in silence, heads bowed as if reflecting on the situation. Frustrated by their quietude, I broke the silence. "How long do you plan to stay silent? It doesn't matter to me anymore." Rather than waiting for a verbal response, I took decisive action. I handed Eric a document I had prepared in advance, a pre-filled divorce form with my signature. Eric looked at the document, utterly confused and taken aback. "It's a divorce form," I said bluntly. "I'm done with someone who won't find a job and didn't even contact me after I went back to my parents' house." "Don't do this. This is too sudden," he protested, his stubbornness further irritating me. It was clear he was oblivious to how his actions had been the root of our marital problems. Unmoved by his pleas, I stood firm in my decision. I was ready to move on from the turmoil and start anew, free from the dysfunction that had overshadowed my life for too long. My decision to divorce Eric was final, and nothing he could say would change that. Still in shock, Eric questioned if the divorce was too harsh. I responded firmly, unwavering in my resolve. "I don't think so. It's your fault too." I directed that same sternness toward my mother-in-law, who had also contributed to the situation. Resigned, Eric signed the divorce papers, cautioning me not to regret my decision. Yet I felt a profound sense of relief, confident that the one who would regret this decision would be Eric, not me. "I'll submit the divorce papers. I don't want any compensation. Just go home," I declared, finalizing my separation from Eric. Though it might have seemed harsh, distancing myself was necessary to escape the relentless harassment from my mother-in-law and the strain of Eric's unemployment. 3 weeks later, while enjoying the quiet day at my parents' house, I received an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law. She informed me that the electricity and gas had been cut off at her house and insinuated that I might be responsible. I explained that since the divorce, I had stopped covering Eric's and her living expenses. Desperate, she asked if I could pay just for that month. Given that we were no longer related and I no longer lived there, I found her request absurd and firmly declined. I suggested she ask Eric for assistance since he had promised to find a job. Unable to accept my refusal, she pleaded for help, playing the ex-wife card. I remained resolute, ending the call and blocking her number to avoid further entanglements. Finally, I had severed ties with both my ex-mother-in-law, who had persistently harassed me, and Eric, who had proven unreliable. Life at my parents' house gradually became peaceful, a stark contrast to the tumultuous times I had left behind. I began to enjoy a newfound sense of tranquility and freedom, relieved to have distanced myself from such a toxic environment. Several months after closing that turbulent chapter, I found myself on holiday, checking stock charts and enjoying the peace of my new routine. It was then that I received an unexpected message from Eric. He apologized for everything, acknowledged his past reliance on me, and mentioned his recent employment at a factory. Despite his apology, I felt no desire to re-engage with that part of my life. Eric also wrote about his mother's continued harsh behavior and expressed a wish for me to come back. Reading his message, I was convinced that reconciliation was off the table. I decided to block Eric's number, choosing to permanently close that door. 8 months post-divorce, life took a more positive turn when a friend introduced me to a new man. He was dependable, treated me with respect, and despite our age difference, we found a strong connection. While we weren't rushing toward marriage, I cherished the happy moments we shared. He brought a sense of joy and stability that I had long missed, allowing me to focus on the present and leave my troubled past behind. With him, I began to truly rebuild my life, appreciating each day as it came and looking forward to what the future might hold.